The alien fleet arrived with 16 warships, a planetary conquest manual, and the absolute certainty that Earth would fold in under 4 hours. They were wrong. Not because humanity had a secret weapon, not because the military scrambled in time, but because they landed in New Mexico on a Tuesday, right in the middle of chili harvest season, a county fair. And the personal bad mood of a man named Dale Cooper, who had not slept in 31 hours. If you love HFY stories that hit different, smash that like button and subscribe, because this one is going to leave a mark. Drop a comment right now. What do you think the aliens got wrong first? Now buckle up. This is the story of how the most technologically advanced civilization in the known galaxy picked the absolute worst patch of dirt in the universe to plant their flag, and paid for it in ways no war college ever prepared them for. The Vraxian Dominion had conquered 43 worlds, 43. Each one catalogued, assessed, and absorbed into the empire with the cold efficiency of a machine that had been doing this for 3,000 years. Their scouts were flawless. Their intelligence network spanned solar systems. Their cultural analysis models had predicted the surrender patterns of silicon-based hive minds, methane-breathing monarchies, and 3 separate species that communicated entirely through bioluminescence. They had never encountered anything quite like New Mexico. The problem began, as most Dominion problems did, with the data. Fleet Admiral Jarkin of the 5th Expansion Claw stood at the head of the tactical chamber aboard his command ship, the Endless Patience, and studied the holographic projection of the target planet rotating slowly before him. Earth, third rock from an average yellow star, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, carbon-based life, 8.1 billion inhabitants, most of whom appeared to spend their days staring at small glowing rectangles. Easy, his intelligence officer had said. Predictable, his cultural analyst had confirmed. Docile, his field commander had added with the confident boredom of a man who had never once been wrong before today. They had run the scans. They had filtered the data. They had identified the optimal landing zone based on 17 distinct strategic variables: low population density, flat terrain, minimal organized military presence, high electromagnetic interference to disrupt communication, and a thermal signature that suggested the region was perpetually too hot for comfort, which their model associated with populations too exhausted to resist effectively. The model had selected a stretch of high desert in the American Southwest, a state called New Mexico. What the model had not accounted for was the chili. New Mexico's official state question, a fact that exists in reality and should have terrified the Dominion immediately, is red or green. This is asked at every meal in every diner, by every waitress, with an intensity that suggests the fate of the universe depends on the answer. The Dominion's cultural model interpreted this as a standard greeting. It was not. It was a loyalty test, a declaration of identity. A spiritual crossroads that every New Mexican navigates multiple times per day without breaking stride. The model had also failed to account for the county fair. The Torrance County Fair had been running for 61 years. It featured livestock competitions, chili cook-offs, a rodeo, a demolition derby, tractor pulls, and a pie-eating contest that had sent 2 men to the hospital in 2019 under circumstances the local paper described diplomatically as competitive. Every able-bodied person in a 40-mile radius was either at the fairgrounds, driving toward it, or extremely annoyed that they couldn't be there yet. This meant that when the Vraxian fleet descended through the atmosphere at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September, they were not dropping into a sleepy, disorganized desert community. They were dropping into a county that was already awake, already armed, already caffeinated to dangerous levels, and already in the specific heightened emotional state that only exists when someone is about to win or lose something they've been working toward all year. Fleet Admiral Jarkin watched the descent sequence from orbit and felt nothing but satisfaction. The ships were magnificent. 16 landing craft in diamond formation, black hulls catching the early morning light. Engines humming with the quiet power of technology that had never once failed to intimidate a target population into immediate compliance. The town below was called Estancia. Population 1,571, 1 hardware store, 2 diners, a feed lot, a volunteer fire department. A high school with a state wrestling championship banner from 2018, that still made Coach Randy Gutierrez emotional if you brought it up at the wrong moment. Jarkin had personally approved the location. It looked perfect from orbit. He would spend the next 14 hours revising that opinion in increasingly specific and painful ways. The first landing craft touched down in an open field 3 miles east of town. The ramp lowered. The smoke rolled. 50 armored Vraxian soldiers marched out in perfect formation, weapons at the ready, visors sealed, prepared to announce the arrival of a superior civilization to a population of primitive biologicals who had never once seen faster-than-light travel. What they saw instead was a man named Dale Cooper standing at the fence line in a camouflage hat, holding a thermos of coffee, staring at them with the flat, unimpressed expression of someone who had already decided this was going to ruin his Tuesday. Dale had a chilly farm. He had not slept the night before because a section of irrigation pipe had burst at midnight, and he had spent 4 hours in the dark fixing it. He had just gotten back to the fence line to check the repairs when 16 alien warships dropped out of the sky and parked themselves across his harvest field. Dale looked at the ships. He looked at the soldiers. He looked at the flattened rows of ripe Big Jim chilies that the landing gear had crushed on impact. He took a long sip of coffee. Then he pulled out his phone and called his neighbor, Steve Walsh. "Steve," he said, "you're going to want to come out here. And bring the truck." "Which truck?" Dale looked at the alien commander, who had just activated a translation device and was preparing what was clearly a rehearsed speech. "Both of them," Dale said. The alien commander stepped forward and raised one of his 6 arms. "People of Earth," he began, "you stand in the presence of—" Dale held up one finger. "Hold on." The commander stopped. In 43 conquests, no one had ever told him to hold on. "I got a call coming in," Dale said. He turned away and answered his phone. The alien army stood in the New Mexico desert and waited while a man in a camouflage hat finished a phone call about a water pump. The commander looked at his field lieutenant. The lieutenant looked at the commander. Neither of them had language for what was happening. It was only 7:03 in the morning. The day had barely started. And somewhere behind the tree line, the sound of a diesel engine was getting louder. Steve Walsh arrived in 9 minutes with both trucks, his brother-in-law Kevin and Kevin's dog. A massive livestock guardian named Tank, who had strong opinions about strangers in general, and appeared to view armored alien soldiers specifically as a personal challenge. Steve stepped out of the cab, surveyed the 16 alien warships, the 50-man combat unit, and the crushed chili rows. He pulled off his hat, scratched his head, put the hat back on, and turned to Dale. "Government? Don't think so," Dale said. "California? Way worse." The alien commander, who had now been waiting 4 minutes to deliver a planetary conquest announcement, stepped forward again. His translator crackled. "Citizens of this region," he said, "you are now under the authority of the Vraxian Dominion. You will lay down any weapons and await processing." Steve looked at Dale. Dale looked at Steve. "Processing," Steve repeated. "That's what he said." Steve looked back at the alien commander. "Son, I've got 40 acres of chili that need harvesting in the next 6 days before the freeze hits. 3 broken fence sections from last week's wind. A tractor that needs a new alternator. And a county fair entry I've been feeding and grooming since July. I do not have time for processing." The commander's translator struggled with county fair entry and produced something in Vraxian that roughly translated to ritual animal display competition. This was flagged in the cultural database as potentially significant. The flag was ignored. The first major tactical error came at 7:22 a.m. The alien ground unit, attempting to establish a perimeter, sent a patrol team towards Steve's barn to secure what their scanners identified as a significant mechanized asset cluster. What they found inside the barn was Steve's county fair entry, a 2,400-pound Hereford steer named Governor, and 4 other cattle that had been put inside overnight due to the weather. The patrol leader pushed open the barn door. Governor looked at him. The patrol leader looked at Governor. Governor did not wait for a formal introduction. What followed was not a battle. It was a rout. 5 armored Vraxian soldiers, elite members of a military force that had once cracked the defensive grid of a gas giant civilization, were chased out of a barn by one very large, very offended steer and 4 equally motivated supporters. 2 soldiers made it over the fence. One went through it. Two ended up in the water trough in a manner that their armor was not designed to accommodate. From the field, Dale and Steve watched this unfold. "Governor's in a mood," Steve observed. "He's always in a mood before the fair," Dale said. "He knows something's happening." The alien commander watched his patrol retreat across the field in the general direction of anywhere that wasn't the barn. He pulled up his tactical display. The map showed a cluster of red dots moving very fast in no particular direction. "Report," he said into his communicator. There was a long pause, then a breathless voice said, "Hoofed biological. Extremely hostile, requesting extraction. You are requesting extraction from a barn." Another pause. "Sir, it's a very aggressive barn." Back in town, the news was spreading the way news always spreads in a small town, not through official channels, not through emergency alerts, but through a chain of text messages that began with Dale's daughter Amy, who had seen the ships from her bedroom window and immediately texted her best friend Jordan, whose mother Karen happened to be the dispatcher at the county sheriff's office, who told Sheriff Tom Briggs, who drove out to the field, took one look at the situation, called his deputy Marcus Webb, and then called his brother-in-law Phil, who owned the gun shop on Main Street, because Tom had a feeling this was going to be one of those days where you want options. By 8:15 a.m., there were 11 pickup trucks parked along the fence line of Dale's property. The alien commander scanned the growing crowd. His cultural model processed the information. His model had anticipated resistance. It had predicted angry individuals, maybe a disorganized mob, perhaps some thrown objects. It had not predicted the specific energy of a community of people who were inconvenienced rather than afraid. Nobody was running. Nobody was panicking. Several people had brought lawn chairs. A man named Roy set up a small portable grill at the tailgate of his truck. The smell of green chili and eggs drifted across the field. The alien commander stared at Roy's grill. "Is that individual preparing food?" he asked his lieutenant. The lieutenant checked his scanner. "Thermal signature confirms cooking activity, sir. During an invasion. Apparently." The commander pulled up his manual, Chapter 4, Population Response Patterns. He flipped through the expected behaviors. Panic, submission, organized military resistance, attempted negotiation, desperate counterattack. Green chili breakfast was not in Chapter 4. Sheriff Tom Briggs walked up to the fence and looked the alien commander over with the calm, measuring gaze of a man who had been dealing with situations that made no sense for 22 years. "You the one in charge?" Tom asked. "I am Commander Vreth of the Vraxian 5th Expansion Claw," the alien said. "Tom Briggs," the sheriff replied. "I'm going to need you to move your ships off Dale's property. You've damaged his crop, and harvest season is a serious matter in this county." Commander Vreth stared at him. "We are here to conquer your planet," Tom nodded slowly. "I understand that's your intention. But right now you're parked on private property without permission. You've damaged an agricultural operation, and I've got at least 2 complaints from landowners already this morning. So before we get to the conquering part, I need to address the trespassing." Vreth's translator processed this, then processed it again. "You are citing us for trespassing. I'm giving you the opportunity to avoid that," Tom said pleasantly. "Move the ships. Then we can talk about whatever else you've got planned." The alien army had plasma cannons, gravity accelerators, and a ship in orbit capable of leveling a city block. The sheriff had a badge, a notepad, and the quiet certainty of a man who had once talked a man holding a chainsaw into putting it down by simply being more patient. For 11 seconds, the entire alien advance force stood perfectly still. It was Tom's 11 seconds. He owned every one of them. Then a sound rolled across the field from the direction of town. Low and mechanical, getting closer. Dale tilted his head. "Is that the fair tractor parade?" Steve checked his watch. 8:30, right on schedule. The alien commander turned toward the sound. Coming down the county road, directly toward the field, was a procession of 17 restored tractors, 4 horse trailers, 2 hay wagons, and a flatbed truck carrying a sound system playing classic country at a volume that suggested it was less a music system and more a geographic feature. At the front of the procession, driving a 1957 John Deere that he had been restoring for 11 years, was a retired man named Earl Hatch, who had absolutely no idea there was an alien invasion happening because he had not checked his phone since Sunday and was not going to start now. Earl looked at the ships. He drove past them. He had a parade to lead. And just like that, the Vraxian Dominion's first ground offensive was divided neatly in half by a tractor parade it didn't know how to categorize. The cultural model crashed for the first time at 8:34 a.m. It would not be the last time. By 9 in the morning, the alien fleet had made 3 significant tactical decisions. All 3 were mistakes. The first was to split forces. Commander Vreth sent a unit of 20 soldiers into Estancia itself, believing that securing the town's center would give them a command advantage. He had identified the largest building on the main road as a likely administrative hub. It was the County Fairgrounds Exhibition Hall. The fair didn't officially open until 10, but the exhibition hall had been running since 6. Inside, 64 people were arranging livestock displays, setting up vegetable competition tables, hanging quilts, positioning pies, and doing the quiet. Intensely focused work of people who had been preparing for this specific day for an entire year, and were not going to let anything, absolutely anything, derail it. The alien unit marched in through the main doors in full tactical formation, 12 feet tall at the tallest, armor glowing, weapons raised, visors sealed. The room went silent for exactly 2 seconds. Then a woman named Barbara Keene, who was in the middle of positioning her 3-tier entry for the baked goods competition, looked up and said, "Excuse me, you can't come in here with those weapons." "This is a family event." The unit leader activated his translator. "This facility is now under Dominion. I don't care what it's under," Barbara said. "You nearly knocked over my display getting through that door. Do you have any idea how long it took me to arrange those layers?" The unit leader looked at the display. His translator produced no useful context for a competition-baked item. "We are soldiers of the—" "Are you entering the fair?" asked a man named Gerald, who was running the registration desk and had been doing so for 16 consecutive years. "We are not entering the fair," the unit leader said. "Then you need to wait outside until 10 o'clock like everyone else." 3 alien soldiers had their weapons raised and pointed at a room full of fair exhibitors. Not one person in the room moved toward the exits. 12 people had their hands on their hips. 4 had their arms crossed. 2 had already gone back to arranging their displays because they had a deadline. "Humans," the unit leader said loudly. "You are in the presence of, young man." This was from a man named Harold Pierce, 81 years old, 4-time blue ribbon winner in the heirloom vegetable category, standing over a display of tomatoes the size of softballs. Harold had survived 2 tours overseas, 40 years of farming, and a hailstorm in 2017 that had destroyed his entire crop 3 days before the fair. He looked at the alien unit leader the way a man looks at something that is temporarily in his way. "I have been coming to this fair since 1974. Nothing has ever stopped it. Not weather, not money problems, not the year the power went out for 6 hours. Whatever you've got going on out there, it's going to have to wait until after judging." The unit leader had no response for this. His training covered armed resistance, mass panic, political negotiation, and fortified defensive positions. It did not cover Harold Pierce. Meanwhile, the second tactical mistake was unfolding at the chili cook-off pavilion. A second alien unit had identified the pavilion as a chemical processing facility, based on the thermal signatures of 27 active cooking stations and the concentrated atmospheric compounds that their sensors were reading as unknown biological agents with high irritant potential. They were not wrong. Green chili produces capsaicin compounds that their sensors genuinely could not classify. The Dominion had never encountered chili before. Their chemical database had no entry for it. Their hazard assessment model flagged it as a possible weapon. They were about to find out they were right. The unit moved in wearing full sealed armor. Their commander announced the seizure of the facility. The 27 people running cooking stations turned around and looked at them. One of those people was a man named Victor Sandoval. Victor had been cooking green chili since he was 8 years old. He had a cast iron pot that had been in his family for 3 generations. He had been up since 4 in the morning. He had reached what competitive cooks call the zone. That focused, calm, almost meditative state where nothing in the universe exists except the food and the fire. An armored alien had just stepped between Victor and his pot. Victor picked up his pot and stepped around the alien. The alien stepped in front of him again. Victor set down the pot. He looked at the alien. He looked at the pot. He looked at the alien again. That, Victor said quietly, is a bad idea. What happened next was extensively documented in the reports that the alien unit filed from the medical bay of the command ship 3 hours later. The summary version is that 27 competitive chili cooks, many of whom had strong feelings about personal space and stronger feelings about their recipes, responded to an armed military intrusion, the way people respond to things that are between them and something they care about. Capsaicin, it turns out, affects Vraxian sensory membranes in ways that their sealed armor had not anticipated, because no one had thought to seal the air recyclers against airborne organic compounds. When the cook-off reached peak heat at 9:40 a.m., and the cumulative atmospheric capsaicin load inside the sealed pavilion hit a concentration that had never existed anywhere in the Vraxian database. 12 soldiers discovered that their own armor had become a delivery system for the most effective respiratory irritant their species had ever encountered. The unit retreated, all 12 of them, through the pavilion wall rather than the door, because the door was blocked by a man named Victor who had gone back to his pot and was not moving. Commander Vreth watched the retreat on his tactical display. "Report," he said. A gasping voice came back. "Chemical facility, active countermeasures." Requesting, a long pause filled with coughing sounds. "Requesting hazmat assessment." "You were defeated by a kitchen," Vreth said. "It was a very aggressive kitchen, sir." The third mistake was the one that truly cost them. Vreth had held back his best unit, 20 elite shock troops, for the town's communications hub. His scanners had identified a building at the center of town with unusually high signal activity. Multiple individuals inside, and what appeared to be a coordinating function based on the number of people entering and leaving. It was the Estancia diner, specifically the breakfast rush. At 9:45 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, the Sunrise Diner on Main Street was operating at maximum capacity. Every booth was full. The counter had 12 people on it. The kitchen was running 3 orders at once. The owner, a man named Frank Delgado, had been in the restaurant business for 31 years and had developed the specific calm of someone who had handled every possible breakfast emergency and was not surprised by anything that happened before noon. The alien shock unit burst through the front door, weapons raised, armor glowing, tactical entry pattern executed with precision. Frank looked up from the register. "Be right with you," he said. The unit leader stopped. "This facility is now under. We're in the middle of the breakfast rush," Frank said. "You want to sit down? I'll have someone with you in a minute. You want to stand there in the doorway? You're going to have to move because I've got a delivery coming through." The unit leader turned to find that Frank was not speaking hypothetically. Coming through the back door was a man named Louis with a hand truck stacked with food service supplies. Louis navigated around 2 alien soldiers without breaking stride, parked the hand truck beside the counter, handed Frank a clipboard to sign, accepted the signed clipboard back, nodded once, and left. The shock unit stood in the Sunrise Diner and tried to figure out what had just happened. It was now 9:52 a.m. In orbit, Fleet Admiral Jarkin was reviewing the morning's data and coming to the first genuinely uncomfortable conclusion of his career. His fleet had landed. His forces had deployed. The population had been contacted and informed of the Dominion's authority, and the town below was currently running a tractor parade, a chili cook-off, and a county fair. "Tactical assessment," he said to his intelligence officer. The officer hesitated. "Sir, the population doesn't appear to be responding to us." Jarkin turned slowly. "What do you mean, not responding?" "I mean they're aware of our presence, sir. The communications intercepts confirm that. They're just—" The officer checked the data again. "They're going about their Tuesday." Jarkin gripped the railing of his command platform. He had conquered 43 worlds. He had never once had to compete with a Tuesday. "Tell Commander Vreth," he said carefully, "that I want an escalation." Now, and somewhere below in the Estancia Fairgrounds, the judging for the heirloom vegetable competition was beginning right on schedule. Harold Pierce straightened his tomatoes and waited. The escalation order reached Commander Vreth at 10:17 a.m. He deployed his grav tanks. The Vraxian grav tank was a marvel of military engineering, a 15-ton hovering weapons platform that generated a gravitational field strong enough to flip a building. Mounted with plasma cannons that could reduce a vehicle to slag at 400 meters. They had broken siege lines on fortress worlds. They had cracked the walls of fortified capitals. They were, by any measurable standard, terrifying. Estancia's main street was 40 feet wide. The first tank entered the street at 10:23 a.m. and immediately created a traffic situation. The street was not empty. The street had never been empty. It was a Tuesday during Fair Week, which meant it had the baseline traffic of a normal Tuesday, plus the additional vehicles of everyone who had come in early for setup. Plus the trucks belonging to the people now parked out at Dale's Field watching the ships, plus Roy's grill, which Roy had relocated to the sidewalk in front of the hardware store because he felt the crowd had moved and he wanted to be where the crowd was. The grav tank drifted left to avoid a parked delivery truck. It drifted right to avoid a water main access point that its navigation system flagged as ground infrastructure. It stopped at an intersection because there was a woman named Janet crossing the street with a wagon full of quilts. Janet did not see the tank until she was already crossing. She looked up at it. She looked at her wagon, she looked at the tank again. "Move, please," she said. "I'm running late for judging." The tank sat there. Janet walked around it, wagon and all, and continued across the street. The tank commander reported to Vreth, "Civilian obstruction on the primary advance route." "What kind of obstruction?" "A woman with textiles, sir." There was a long pause on the comm channel. "Remove the obstruction." "She's already gone, sir. She went around us." At that moment, Sheriff Tom Briggs walked up to the tank and knocked on the hull. After a moment, a hatch opened. Tom looked up at the alien inside. "Is this your vehicle?" "I am the commander of this. You're blocking an intersection," Tom said. "I'm going to need you to move it or I'm going to have to call for a tow." The tank commander stared at him. "I have a plasma cannon." "I can see that," Tom said. "And I've got a tow company that charges by the hour and doesn't care what the vehicle is. Your choice." The tank moved, not because of fear. Because the alien commander genuinely didn't know what else to do with a sheriff who was treating a grav tank like an illegally parked car. The second tank hit a different kind of problem. It had been routed toward the fairgrounds, where Vreth's intelligence suggested the largest gathering of people was located. This was correct. What his intelligence had not suggested was what those people were going to be doing at 10:30 a.m. on the first day of the county fair. The rodeo had just started. The tank rolled toward the arena fence. Inside, 8 seconds into a bull ride, a man named Mike Chavez was on top of a 1,800-pound bull named Catastrophe. The crowd was watching Mike. Mike was watching Catastrophe. Catastrophe was not watching the tank because Catastrophe did not care about the tank. The tank fired a warning shot into the air. The crowd looked up. The judges looked up. Mike looked up briefly, which cost him his grip, and Catastrophe took the opportunity to end the ride at the 4-second mark. Mike hit the dirt. Catastrophe kept going. The clowns moved in. The crowd booed. And then 200 rodeo spectators turned toward the tank with the specific anger of people whose event had just been interrupted. The tank commander's threat assessment model began producing readings it had never seen before. The crowd was not running. It was not panicking. It was not organizing into a defensive formation. It was doing something the model had no category for. It was getting louder. The loudest of all was a man named Clay Morrison, who had been raising and training Catastrophe for 4 years, and had a financial interest in this particular ride going 8 seconds. Clay walked up to the tank fence, looked at the plasma scorch mark in the dirt, and said things that the alien translator rendered in Vraxian as extended declaration of personal grievance with escalating emotional intensity. Inside the fairgrounds exhibition hall, things had reached a different kind of boiling point. The alien unit that had entered the hall 2 hours earlier had not left. They had not left because every time they tried to move toward the exit, someone asked them a question, not about the invasion. About the fair. The unit had spent the morning being asked whether they were with the commercial vendors, whether they had registered their equipment for the equipment display, and whether they had filled out a liability waiver before bringing weapons onto the fairgrounds. One soldier had been handed a plate of food by Barbara Keene, who had decided that if these things were going to stand in her exhibition hall, they were at minimum going to eat something and behave like guests. The soldier had eaten it, he had not meant to, but it was handed to him with such complete assumption that he would accept it, that declining had somehow felt more complicated than simply taking the plate. He had been standing there for 40 minutes holding an empty plate and not knowing how to leave. Harold Pierce had won his blue ribbon. He had accepted it with quiet dignity and was now rearranging his tomatoes for display. He glanced at the alien soldiers occasionally with the patient tolerance of a man who had outlasted considerably bigger problems. "You're still here," Harold said to the nearest soldier. "I am unsure how to proceed," the soldier said via translator. Harold nodded. "That's fair, this place can be like that." He handed the soldier a tomato. "Try that." "Go on." The soldier's armor had an external sampling port designed for atmospheric analysis. It turned out, worked on tomatoes. There was a long pause. "This is," the soldier started. "Brandywine heirloom," Harold said. "Been growing that strain for 30 years. The soldier said nothing, but he did not leave. In orbit, Fleet Admiral Jarkin was receiving reports from every unit simultaneously. The grav tank on Main Street had been issued a verbal warning by a sheriff. The unit at the fair had spent 2 hours inside an exhibition hall and had apparently been fed. The cook-off unit was still recovering in the medical bay. The recon team at the ranch was currently being asked to help repair a fence section by the landowner, who had determined that since they had driven through it, they were going to fix it. "Total personnel status," Jarkin said quietly. The intelligence officer read through the reports with the expression of a man who had chosen the wrong career. 12 in medical. 8 helping with fence repair. 1 being given a tour of livestock competition. 4 redirected by traffic enforcement. 2 sitting with elderly residents in the exhibition hall. 3 unable to extract from a diner. He paused. "And sir, the cook-off unit leader has filed a formal request to obtain whatever compound was in that pavilion. Because he believes it may have military applications. He wants to weaponize the cooking. He's had time to think, sir." Jarkin turned back to the window. The planet below looked exactly as it had this morning. Quiet, sun-baked, ordinary. "Double the orbital bombardment team," he said. "We go to Phase 2. The intelligence officer pulled up the Phase 2 authorization. His hand paused over the controls. "Sir," he said carefully, "Phase 2 requires target zone clearance." "And sir, the target zone currently has a rodeo in it." Jarkin closed his eyes. Down below, catastrophe had been caught. The crowd was still angry. And Clay Morrison had found Commander Vreth and was explaining, in full detail and at considerable volume, exactly what the Dominion was going to have to do about the interrupted bull ride. Vreth's translator was working overtime. And somewhere on the edge of the fairgrounds, a volunteer named Dale Cooper, who had driven in from his field because Roy's grill had green chili and Dale had not eaten yet, looked up at the alien ship still hanging in the sky and said to Steve Walsh, who was standing beside him with a plate of eggs, "You think they're going to try something bigger?" Steve considered this. "Probably. Yeah," Dale said. He finished his coffee. "That's going to go badly for them." He was not wrong. The Phase 2 order reached Commander Vreth at 12:04 p.m. Phase 2 was the Dominion's standard urban pacification protocol, a coordinated push using all available ground forces, grav tank support, drone coverage, and a psychological broadcast system that projected the Fleet Admiral's image into the sky with a planetary surrender ultimatum. It had worked on 31 of the 43 conquered worlds. On the other 12, it had worked within 40 minutes. Vreth looked at his available forces. He had lost 12 to the medical bay, 8 to fence repair, and an assorted number to what his reports were now euphemistically calling civilian integration events. He had roughly 60 functional combat soldiers remaining, 4 grav tanks, and a drone swarm. Against a county fair, he gave the order anyway, because at a certain point you either follow protocol or you admit that everything has gone wrong, and Vreth was not ready for that admission. The drone swarm deployed at 12:09 p.m. 48 Vraxian tactical drones, fast, quiet, and capable of mapping a target zone in under 3 minutes, dropped from the command ship and fanned out across Estancia. What Vreth did not know was that Estancia had a problem with feral hogs. It was not a military vulnerability. It was just a fact of life in that part of New Mexico. Feral hogs are aggressive, territorial, and extremely destructive, and the ranches around Estancia had been dealing with them for years. Several ranchers had invested in trail cameras, thermal sensors, and motion-activated response systems to protect their property. One of those ranchers was a man named Gary Hutchins. Gary had spent 3 years and an amount of money he didn't discuss with his wife building what he called the Hog Defense Network, a grid of sensors, alarms, and automated deterrents covering his entire property. The system was networked, motion-sensitive, and triggered by the thermal and movement signatures of anything the size of a large dog or bigger. The Vraxian drones were the size of large dogs. At 12:11 p.m., Gary's system went active. 48 drones hit the outer perimeter of the sensor grid simultaneously and triggered every alarm Gary had ever installed. Lights blazed on across the property. Air horns fired. Sprinkler systems activated. 3 automated noise generators that Gary had rigged to sound like gunshots went off in sequence. The drones interpreted this as armed resistance and executed evasive maneuvers. Evasive maneuvers at low altitude in an area with trees, fence lines, power poles, and the specific chaos of a property that had been modified by a man with too much free time, and too many ideas proved to be a significant tactical challenge. Gary himself came out of his house at 12:12, assessed the situation, and called his friend Dale. "Dale," he said, "something's happening with my hog system." "That's the alien drones," Dale said. "Oh, a pause. Should I turn the system off?" Dale thought about it. "You know what? Leave it." By 12:19, the drone swarm had lost 11 units to fence lines, power infrastructure, and in one case a very large windmill that the evasion algorithm had not modeled correctly. The remaining 37 regrouped and attempted to form a coherent mapping pattern, but Gary's system had also triggered the neighbors' alarm systems. And the neighbors' systems had triggered their neighbors, and by 12:25 the drone network was operating inside a cascading web of alarms, lights, and automated deterrents that their mapping software couldn't categorize as anything other than active resistance zone. The drone commander reported to Vreth. "Target area defended by extensive automated weapons network." "Weapons network," Vreth repeated. "Motion triggered, thermal sensitive, extremely aggressive, sir." Vreth closed his eyes and thought carefully about his next move. Then Fleet Admiral Jarkin's voice came through on the command channel. "Vreth, what is the status of the psychological broadcast?" "The broadcast, right, the giant holographic ultimatum." That was still the plan. The projector system activated at 12:31 p.m. above the center of Estancia. Fleet Admiral Jarkin's face appeared in the sky, 40 feet tall, framed by what the Dominion's designers intended to be a dramatically intimidating energy field, and his voice boomed across the town. "People of New Mexico," Jarkin said, "you have resisted, you have fought, you have shown more spirit than most civilizations we have encountered, but the Vraxian Dominion does not lose. You are outmatched, your technology is primitive, your military is absent, and your continued resistance serves no purpose. Surrender now and join the Empire peacefully. Or face the consequences." There was a long silence over Estancia. Then Roy, who had relocated his grill a 3rd time and was now directly beneath the hologram, looked up and said, "Is that thing blocking the sun?" "Little bit," said the man beside him. "Can he move left? I need the light for the grill." Several people called up at the hologram, "Move left, move left." Jarkin, in orbit, watched the crowd below through his tactical feed. They were pointing at him, but not with fear. They were pointing the way people point at something that is in their way. "They want you to move left, sir," the intelligence officer said quietly. "I am not moving left," Jarkin said. Sheriff Tom Briggs had borrowed a megaphone from the fairgrounds. He pointed it at the hologram. "Sir," Tom said into the megaphone, "you are conducting an unauthorized broadcast over a populated area. I'm going to need you to produce a permit or shut that down." The alien broadcast system did not have a response protocol for permit requests. "Also," Tom continued, "your ground units have caused property damage totaling what I'm estimating is north of $40,000, including crop damage, fence damage, one disrupted rodeo event, and a county fair intrusion. I'm going to need contact information and proof of insurance." The intelligence officer looked at Jarkin. "Sir, do we have insurance?" The hologram flickered. That was the moment the real resistance arrived. Not organized, not military. There was no chain of command, no unified strategy, no coordinated counteroffensive. What there was Dale Cooper and Steve Walsh and 30 other people who had been watching all morning and had collectively decided that the thing that had been hovering over their county since dawn had gone on. Long enough. Dale had a flatbed truck. On that flatbed truck was a piece of equipment he had borrowed from Gary at some point in the last hour. An industrial agricultural water cannon originally designed for high-pressure irrigation. Trenching. It had a range of 60 meters and a flow rate that could shift a ton of topsoil in under a minute. Dale pointed it at the nearest grav tank. The tank commander saw it on his external feed. Unknown weapon system detected, he reported. Assessment? Vreth asked. Extremely high-pressure liquid projectile, sir. Civilian grade, but... A burst of static as the cannon fired. Sir, I am no longer in contact with Tank 3. Tank 3 was upside down in a drainage channel. The response from the fairgrounds was less organized and considerably louder. 200 rodeo spectators, 60 exhibition hall participants, 30 chili cook-off competitors, 12 fair staff, 4 members of the volunteer fire department, and a high school wrestling team that had been at the fairgrounds for a pre-season conditioning session, all of whom had been watching the alien occupation of their fair since morning, came through. The fairgrounds entrance at 12:47 p.m. They were not carrying military weapons. They were carrying what they had. Livestock ropes, tool handles, fire hoses, fair equipment, and in one case a cast iron skillet that had been entered in a historical cookware display and was borrowed by its owner for the afternoon. The alien ground forces had trained for armed infantry. They had trained for fortified positions. They had not trained for 200 angry fairgoers who were upset about their rodeo, their cook-off, their exhibition hall, and several hours of their Tuesday. The wrestling team went through the alien perimeter in under 4 minutes. The coach, a man named Randy Gutierrez, had been looking for a motivational focal point since the season started. He found one. Victor Sandoval came out of the cook-off pavilion carrying his cast iron pot, which was still warm. Clay Morrison came out of the rodeo arena with a lasso and 8 seconds of grievance. Barbara Keene came out of the exhibition hall with 4 women from her quilting group, each of whom had decades of agricultural community resourcefulness and absolutely no patience remaining. And Earl Hatch drove his 1957 John Deere directly at the alien command position. The John Deere maxed out at 12 miles per hour. It didn't need to go faster. It only needed to be coming. Because the alien field commander, standing in the path of a slowly approaching antique tractor driven by an 81-year-old man who showed no signs of stopping, discovered something that his training had not covered. There is no protocol for a man who genuinely does not think you are his problem. Earl drove past the command position, through the perimeter and out the other side. He was headed back to the parade route. The perimeter no longer existed. And from orbit, Fleet Admiral Jarkin watched his invasion dissolve into something that his tactical systems could only describe as a large community event with military elements, which was accurate. In the same way that calling a hurricane a weather event with wind is technically accurate and entirely misses the point. The hologram was still running. Tom Briggs was still asking for the permit. "Shut it down," Jarkin said quietly. "Sir, shut down the broadcast," he turned from the window. "And get me a full damage report. I want to know exactly how much of our equipment is currently in a drainage channel." The hologram went dark over Estancia at 1:02 p.m. In the sudden absence of the projection, the sun came back out over Main Street. Roy adjusted his grill toward the light. "There we go," he said. The Vraxian ground forces began their withdrawal at 2:15 p.m. It was not announced. There was no formal retreat order, no trumpet call, no dramatic signal. Commander Vreth simply sent a quiet priority message to all units: consolidate and return to the extraction points. The message was worded as a tactical repositioning, because in the Dominion's military culture, retreating from a county fair was not something you put into the official record as a retreat. The extraction itself took longer than expected. The 8 soldiers who had been helping repair Dale's fence had actually finished the fence, and were now in the middle of a conversation with Steve Walsh about soil conditions. Because Steve had questions, and the Vraxian biological scanners could analyze dirt composition. And Steve was the kind of farmer who could not ignore useful information, just because the person offering it had arrived in a warship. The soldier who had been eating Barbara's food in the exhibition hall had to be called twice. He filed no protest about leaving, but he did accept a wrapped portion of something Barbara pressed into his hands on the way out. He carried it back to the transport without quite knowing how to explain it in any report. Harold Pierce had given one of the departing soldiers a tomato, a Brandywine heirloom, same as before. The soldier took it without making it weird, which Harold respected. The medical bay unit came out of the cook-off pavilion looking considerably better but still occasionally coughing. Victor Sandoval watched them go. Then he went back to his pot because the cook-off judging had been rescheduled to 3:00 p.m. and he had adjustments to make. The grav tanks that were still functional pulled back. Tank 3 was recovered from the drainage channel by Gary Hutchins, who had a tractor and was willing to help for reasons that were simply practical. He didn't want an alien tank in his drainage infrastructure permanently. Gary later described the recovery operation as not that different from pulling a truck out of a ditch, except heavier and weirder. Sheriff Tom Briggs stood at the edge of Dale's field and watched the landing craft rise one by one, their engines kicking up dust that drifted across the chilly rows. He had his hands in his pockets. He watched them go the way he watched most things, quietly, steadily, without rushing to a conclusion. Dale stood beside him. "Think they're coming back?" Dale asked. Tom considered this. "Not today. Fair enough." They stood there until the last ship cleared the cloud layer and disappeared into the blue. Then Tom walked back to his truck, got in, and drove toward the fairgrounds because he'd promised to be there for the livestock competition, and he was already late. In orbit, Fleet Admiral Jarkin sat in the silence of his command chamber and looked at Earth. He had conquered 43 worlds. He had never written a report like the one he now had to write. He had to explain to Dominion's Central Command, to the admirals and council members and strategic planners who had approved this campaign, that the 5th expansion claw had been deployed against a planet of 8 billion and had been stopped. Not by armies or weapons or orbital defenses, but by a county fair, a cast iron skillet, an agricultural water cannon, an irrigation drone defense network, and a man on a tractor who hadn't noticed the invasion was happening. He pulled up the official conquest result form. He had never filled one in under the failed category before. "Intelligence officer," he said. "Sir, enter Earth into the restricted category." Duration? Jarkin thought about the morning, about the sheriff and the permit, about Harold and the tomato, about the woman with the quilt cart who had walked around a grav tank without breaking stride, about the man named Roy who had moved his grill 3 times just to stay near the action, eating his eggs while a planetary invasion unfolded around him. "Indefinite," Jarkin said. "Permanent review cycle, no reapproach without full cultural reassessment. Noted. Shall I include threat classification details?" "Yes," Jarkin began to dictate. "Primary resistance characteristics. Organized non-response, community cohesion, agricultural infrastructure weaponization, emotional investment in local events. Calendar-specific behavioral intensity. Sir, what does that last one mean?" "It means," Jarkin said, "do not land on a Tuesday during Fair Week." He paused. "Actually, just don't land at all. Flag every regional event calendar on the planet as a tactical hazard. If they're doing something they care about, leave them alone." The officer entered the notes. He hesitated. "Sir, do we have a reason code for the retreat, for the official record?" Jarkin was quiet for a moment. "Cultural complexity," he said finally. "Enter it as cultural complexity." It was the most honest thing in any of the reports. Back in Estancia, the county fair ran to its scheduled close at 8 o'clock. Victor Sandoval won the chili cook-off, which surprised no one who knew Victor. Barbara Keene took second place in the baked goods competition, which she accepted graciously and discussed at length over the following 3 weeks with everyone who would listen. Harold Pierce got his blue ribbon. Clay Morrison's Bull Catastrophe was awarded a special judge's recognition for most memorable performance, which Clay framed and hung in his barn. Mike Chavez, the rider who had been thrown at the 4-second mark, signed up for the next rodeo in 2 weeks and told anyone who asked that getting interrupted by an alien invasion was the most annoying thing that had ever happened to him on a bull. Dale Cooper's chili harvest, despite the crushed rows from the landing gear, came in at 91% of projected yield. Dale made a note to claim the difference on his property damage form, which Tom Briggs had created as an official document because there was no existing form for alien agricultural interference, and Tom believed documentation was important. The Dominion did eventually get the insurance question answered. Though it took 6 weeks, and went through 3 different Dominion diplomatic liaisons who could not figure out whether planetary conquest fell under commercial liability or acts of war. In the end, the Dominion transferred the equivalent of $40,000 in rare metals through a process that took 2 months and generated enough paperwork that Gerald at the fair registration desk later said it was the most organized alien activity he'd ever seen. Steve Walsh still has the soil composition data. He used it the following spring to adjust his fertilizer application on 2 fields and got his best yield in 11 years. He has not told anyone where the information came from, partly because it's complicated to explain and partly because the results are excellent and he doesn't want to jinx it. Gary Hutchins never found out if his hog defense network had actually stopped any feral hogs, because after the drone incident the hogs stayed off his property for 6 months. He chose to count this as a win. Earl Hatch finished the tractor parade. He found out about the invasion later that evening when his granddaughter showed him the photos. He looked at them for a while and then said, "Huh." He went back to watching television. He had seen stranger things in 81 years, not many, but some. And somewhere beyond the reach of any signal from Earth, the flagship of the Vraxian 5th Expansion Claw traveled through hyperspace toward its next assignment, carrying the official record of what had happened in Estancia, New Mexico, on a Tuesday in September. The record was accurate, the record was thorough. The record contained more detail about chili peppers, county fair logistics, and the behavior of feral hog deterrent systems than any military document in Dominion history. The record did not fully explain it, because some things don't fully explain. Some things just are what they are, a community of people who were busy with their lives and their land and their Tuesday, who responded to an invasion the way they responded to everything else. With stubbornness, with community, with the quiet certainty that whatever it was, they dealt with worse and had things to do. The Dominion intelligence file on Earth was updated one final time before the fleet jumped. The last entry, written by a junior analyst who had been monitoring communications from the surface all day, read, "Note, at approximately 20:00 hours local time, a gathering was observed at the original landing site. The structure of the gathering matches patterns associated with community celebration. The humans have decorated the location with lights. They appear to be cooking. Based on available intercepts, the primary topics of conversation are the competition results from the fair crop yield projections for the fall, and whether the drainage channel incident was Gary's fault or the tank's fault. The invasion does not appear to be a topic of significant discussion." The analyst had added one final line, then deleted it, then added it back again because it was accurate and accuracy mattered. "They seem fine. If you made it this far, you are a legend." This is exactly the kind of story that deserves to be shared. Drop a comment below which moment hit hardest for you, the tractor, Harold's tomato, or Roy and his grill. Let us know and share this with someone who needs a good story today. Subscribe for more HFY tales where humanity shows up and doesn't back down. See you in the next one.